Something is at your door. There's a moment, a specific, bone-chilling moment, that millions of Americans have now experienced because of one small piece of technology mounted beside their front door. It's 2 a.m. Your phone buzzes on the nightstand. The screen lights up the dark room, and the notification reads, "Motion detected at your front door." You tell yourself it's probably nothing. A raccoon, a stray cat. Maybe the wind caught a plastic bag and sent it drifting past the sensor. You tap the notification anyway, half asleep, expecting to see an empty porch bathed in the pale blue glow of an infrared camera. But what's staring back at you from the screen isn't a raccoon. It isn't a plastic bag. It's a face. And it's looking directly into the lens. Welcome. Tonight we're going deep into some of the most disturbing, most unsettling, and most genuinely terrifying doorbell camera footage ever captured across the United States. And we're not just going to watch the clips. We're going to tell you the full story behind each one. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't what you see on the screen. Sometimes the scariest part is what happened before the camera started rolling, and what might have happened if nobody had been watching. So lock your doors, pull the curtains, and do not, under any circumstances, ignore your next motion alert. Incident 01, the eyeball at 3 a.m. Let's start with the one that broke Reddit. It was a Thursday night in a quiet suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. A homeowner, we'll call him Derek, had adopted a 3-year-old rescue shepherd mix named Biscuit about 8 months prior. Biscuit was calm, well-trained, and had never once made a fuss in the middle of the night. Not during thunderstorms. Not when the neighbors let their dogs out at odd hours. Not ever. So when Derek was jolted awake at 3:12 a.m. by Biscuit, absolutely losing his mind, barking, scratching at the bedroom door, whining in that high-pitched way that signals something deeper than just wanting outside, Derek knew something was wrong. He grabbed his phone from the charger and sat up. Biscuit was at the foot of the bed now, stiff-legged, ears pinned back, staring at the bedroom door with the kind of focused, predatory stillness that you only see when a dog senses something a human can't. Then the notification came through. Motion detected at your front door. Derek's thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before he opened the camera app. The feed loaded slowly. Those few seconds of buffering that feel, in the dead of night, like an eternity. And then the image appeared. And what he saw made his stomach drop straight through the mattress. Pressed up against the camera, so close that it was slightly out of focus, was an eye. Just one eye, filling most of the frame. A human eye, wide open, the iris catching the faint infrared light of the camera in a way that made it look almost luminescent, almost wet, almost alive in a way that felt deeply, fundamentally wrong. And the man it belonged to was talking, not loudly, not in a way that suggested he wanted anyone to hear him. He was murmuring, low and continuous, like someone deep in conversation with a person only they could see. Occasionally, the murmuring would shift into something that sounded like whispering, urgent, clipped words that Derek couldn't make out through the audio feed. But that Biscuit apparently could hear just fine from inside the house, because the dog pressed himself against Derek's legs and refused to stop growling. The man, tall, wearing a dark jacket, no distinguishing features visible, eventually pulled back from the camera. And that's when things shifted from deeply unsettling to actively frightening. He knocked, softly at first, then a little harder. Then he reached out and tried the doorknob. Derek, watching all of this from his phone, did not move from his bedroom. He sat frozen on the edge of his mattress, watching the man methodically work his way across the porch, trying the doorknob, stepping to the side window and pressing his face against the glass. returning to the door, knocking again, always muttering, always that low, wet murmuring that never stopped. At 3:27 a.m., 15 full minutes after the initial notification, Derek finally spoke through the camera's two-way audio function. His voice, he later admitted, was shaking. "I can see you on camera," he said. "I'm calling the police right now." The response was immediate and somehow made everything worse. The man stepped back. He straightened up. And then, with a calm that felt almost rehearsed, he said, "Hey, sorry, man. I'm just looking for my dog." A pause. "His name is Buddy." Derek stared at the screen. Biscuit pressed harder against his legs. "At 3 in the morning," Derek said. "He got out," the man said simply. And then, without another word, he walked down the porch steps and disappeared into the dark. Derek called the police. By the time they arrived, the man was gone. There was no dog. There had been no dog. The officer who took Derek's statement looked at the camera footage, rewound it, watched the eye filling the frame for a long moment, and then looked up at Derek with an expression that wasn't quite professional neutrality. "You did the right thing not opening the door," the officer said. He didn't say anything else. He didn't have to. Incident 02. The shape that passed through. Not every entry on this list has an easy explanation. Some of them, and this is the one that tends to keep people up at night long after the rational mind has done its work, don't have any explanation at all. This footage was captured by a homeowner in rural Tennessee. He'd installed the camera after a string of porch thefts in his neighborhood. Nothing dramatic, just packages going missing, the usual suburban nuisance crime. And for several months, the camera had dutifully recorded nothing more alarming than the UPS truck and the occasional neighborhood cat. Then, one evening in late October, the camera captured something that the homeowner initially thought was a glitch in the feed. He was reviewing the night's footage the following morning, a habit he'd gotten into after the package thefts, when he saw it. A figure. Standing at the edge of the porch, slightly off to the side of the front door, facing away from the camera. From the posture and general shape, it appeared to be a man. He stood very still. And then, from the upper left corner of the frame, something else appeared. It's difficult to describe in words, and the footage itself has been analyzed, slowed down, color-corrected, and scrutinized by hundreds of amateur investigators online. And none of them have reached a consensus. The best description most people settle on is this. It looked like a figure made of light. Not bright light, not a flashlight or a car's headbeam or anything so mundane, but a soft, diffuse, slightly transparent luminescence in roughly human form. It drifted. That's the word that keeps coming up in the discussions. Drifted. Not walked, not floated. Drifted. The way smoke drifts or the way a reflection moves when water is disturbed. It came from the left side of the frame and moved slowly, unhurriedly, toward the door. And then it passed through the figure standing on the porch, not around, not behind, through. The man on the porch reacted the moment it happened. He spun sharply, the way a person turns when they hear a sound directly behind them. He looked around. He looked directly at the camera. His expression, visible only briefly and only partially, seemed to show confusion. Maybe something more than confusion. He stood for another moment. Then he walked away. The homeowner watched this footage 4 times before calling his wife in to watch it. She watched it twice. Then she went and checked that the front door was locked, even though it was 9 in the morning and the sun was fully up. When the homeowner posted the footage online, it generated thousands of comments within 48 hours. Some people said it was lens flare, though the camera wasn't pointed toward any light source that could produce that effect. Some said it was a reflection from a passing car's headlights. Some said the man on the porch and the drifting figure were part of the same hoax, that the whole thing had been staged. The homeowner's response to the staging theory was simple and difficult to argue with. Why would I stage a video on a camera that only I was monitoring? I hadn't even posted anything online before. I found this watching my own security footage. I didn't go looking for this. It found me. No one has offered a better answer. Incident 03. The Clowns of 2016. If you were online in the fall of 2016, you remember the clown panic. What started as isolated, scattered reports of people dressed in clown costumes lurking near tree lines and school bus stops in South Carolina metastasized with extraordinary speed, fueled by social media, into a nationwide phenomenon. Within weeks, clown sightings had been reported in dozens of states. Schools went on lockdown. Parents kept their children home. Police departments issued statements. And doorbell cameras across America began capturing footage that even years later is genuinely difficult to watch without feeling a cold, specific kind of dread. The first clip we want to discuss was captured in suburban Georgia. It was early evening, still light enough outside that you could see clearly, and the homeowner had no idea anyone was on her porch until her phone buzzed with a motion alert. What the camera showed was a figure in full clown makeup and costume standing at the foot of her porch steps, white face paint, an orange wig. A costume that might have been cheerful on Halloween, but on a random Tuesday evening in October was something else entirely. The figure was holding something, small, metallic, catching the last of the evening light. It was a knife, not a theatrical prop knife with a rubber blade, a real knife, a fixed-blade hunting knife. The figure stood there for what the timestamp shows was nearly 40 seconds. Then it walked up the porch steps, slow and deliberate, and stood at the front door. It reached out and rang the doorbell. The homeowner did not answer. She was inside, watching the footage on her phone, pressed against the kitchen wall with her 2 kids sitting on the floor beside her. She'd already dialed 911. The dispatcher told her to stay inside, stay quiet, and stay away from the windows. The figure waited at the door for another 20 seconds. Then it turned, walked back down the steps, and disappeared around the side of the house. The police found no one in the immediate area when they arrived. The homeowner's neighbor, 3 doors down, reported that same night that someone had left a red balloon tied to their mailbox. Nobody ever determined who was responsible. The second clown incident we have footage from is, in some ways, more disturbing because of the patience it demonstrates. This was captured by a homeowner in suburban Illinois. The camera, mounted at the corner of the front porch, had a wide field of view that included the end of the driveway and a portion of the sidewalk beyond. And what it captured, over the course of nearly 6 minutes, was a figure in a clown costume standing at the far end of that sidewalk. Just standing. Watching the house. For 6 minutes. The homeowner didn't notice the figure at first. He was inside, working late, and didn't check his alerts until almost an hour after the footage was captured. When he did, he went through the footage frame by frame with the kind of focused attention that comes from genuine unease. The figure never moved for the first 4.5 minutes. Then it began to walk, slowly, not quickly, as if it had all the time in the world, towards a house. It came up the driveway. It stopped in front of the doorbell camera. It leaned in close, and the painted face filling the frame for a long and deeply uncomfortable moment. And then it turned around and walked away. The homeowner posted the footage. It spread quickly, the way those videos did in 2016. In the comments, someone who claimed to live in the same neighborhood wrote, "I saw the same person walking down Elm Street around 11 p.m. They were gone by the time I pulled out my phone. Nobody knows why. Nobody knows who it was. And the homeowner, to this day, checks his camera every single night before he goes to bed." The bold and the desperate incident. 04. The man who couldn't hear the danger coming. There's a particular kind of vulnerability that most of us don't think about until it's almost too late. It's not the vulnerability of being unarmed, or of living alone, or of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. It's simpler than that, more mundane, more universal. It's the vulnerability of wearing headphones. This incident happened on a quiet Monday afternoon in a residential neighborhood outside of Phoenix, Arizona. The homeowner, we'll call him Marcus, worked from home, and on this particular afternoon he was deep in a project, headphones on, the world outside effectively muted. He had the front windows open. It was warm and there was a good breeze. But he was focused on his screen and paying attention to nothing outside his immediate workspace. At a pool, 2:17 p.m., his doorbell camera captured a man in a dark gray hoodie approaching the front door. The man rang the doorbell. Marcus, with his headphones on, heard nothing. The man knocked, firmly the way you knock when you need someone to answer. Marcus heard nothing. The man stepped back. He looked at the windows. He looked at the street. He looked at the front door. He looked at his phone, typed something, put the phone back in his pocket, and then he left. 14 minutes later, 2:31 p.m. by the timestamp, he returned. And he hadn't come back alone. The second man was wearing a white hoodie. He was bigger, and he moved with the kind of purposeful energy that, when you see it on security footage, your brain registers immediately as a threat, even before the conscious mind has articulated what it's seeing. The man in the dark hoodie stepped up to the front door. The man in the white hoodie positioned himself about 6 feet back and slightly to the side, the position of a lookout, or of someone who knows exactly what they're doing and wants to maintain situational awareness. Then the man in the dark hoodie reared back and kicked the door. It was a serious kick, a deliberate, powerful attempt to force the door open. The door held. He kicked it again and again. What the man didn't know, couldn't have known, was that the impacts were coming through. Even with headphones on, even deep in concentration, the physical concussion of someone repeatedly kicking your front door is not something the human body completely fails to register. It travels through the floor, through the walls. It finds you. Marcus pulled his headphones off and stood up. He heard the next kick clearly. He moved to the entryway and shouted. Something loud, something that communicated presence and readiness, though the exact words are unclear on the recording. What is clear is the effect. Both men startled visibly, and the man in the white hoodie was already moving before the man in the dark hoodie had even fully processed what he'd heard. Within 4 seconds, both of them were off the porch and moving fast down the street. Marcus called 911. He then pulled up his camera footage and watched what had happened while he'd been sitting 15 feet away, completely unaware. He watched it 3 times. He has not worn headphones since. Incident 05. The man with a script. Some of the most unsettling footage in the world of doorbell cameras isn't unsettling because of what it shows. It's unsettling because of what it implies. Because of the story underneath the story. The thing that almost happened. The thing that was narrowly avoided. The thing that someone nearly opened their door to without understanding what was on the other side. This footage was captured in a neighborhood in suburban Dallas, Texas, on a warm weekday afternoon. The homeowner, we'll call her Sandra, was inside when the motion sensor triggered. She watched the feed on her phone. What she saw first was a man she didn't recognize, shirtless, standing on her porch. He was looking back over his shoulder repeatedly, not nervously, but checking, the way you check when you're confirming that someone can see you. He knocked. Sandra watched without answering. The man began to speak. And this is where the footage becomes genuinely disturbing, because he wasn't speaking to Sandra. He was performing a conversation with Sandra, staging it, miming the back and forth of a dialogue that Sandra was not participating in, for the benefit of someone Sandra couldn't see. "Oh, hey," the man said to the door. "Sorry to bother you. I was just wondering." He paused as if listening. Yeah, no, I totally understand." He nodded, paused again. Okay, I'll try next door." He smiled, wide, performative, visible, at a point somewhere over the camera. Sandra later told the story this way. "He was acting like I'd answered the door, like we'd had a conversation and I'd turned him away politely. But nobody had answered. I was watching the whole thing on my phone and not saying a word. He was putting on a show for whoever was in that car. The car, that's the detail that anchors this story. Parked at the curb, visible in the peripheral edge of the camera's frame, was a dark sedan. The windows were up. It was not possible to make out the driver. Police later theorized, and this is where the almost becomes terrifying, that the man on the porch had been sent to confirm occupancy. Whether the intent was robbery, something worse, or something involving a specific person they believed lived at that address, the car was there as command and control. The shirtless man was the probe. His fake conversation was his report back. I knocked. Someone turned me away. Not a clean opportunity. Sandra had never answered the door. She had never spoken a single word, and the man had reported a conversation that never happened. She reviewed the footage twice, then called the non-emergency police line. The officer who responded agreed the behavior was suspicious and concerning. Though without an overt crime having been committed, there wasn't much to pursue. The car's partial plate, caught in the very edge of the frame, didn't lead anywhere definitive. Sandra had a deadbolt installed the following day. She also had the camera repositioned to capture a wider view of the curb. "I keep thinking," she said later, "about what would have happened if I'd answered, what the plan was, what they would have done if the door had opened." She's never stopped thinking about it. Incident 06. The Orb. We want to be clear about something before we discuss this next piece of footage. We're not in the business of selling ghost stories. We are not asking you to believe in the paranormal. What we are asking you to do is watch this footage carefully and then offer a better explanation. Because in the years since this video was first posted, nobody credible has managed to do so. The footage was captured by a homeowner in rural Missouri, late on a weeknight sometime in the winter. The porch light was off. The neighborhood was dark. The only illumination in the frame was the infrared glow of the camera itself, casting the familiar blue-gray tones of night vision across the wooden planks of the porch and the bushes lining the front walkway. For the first several seconds of the clip, nothing happens. The scene is completely still. Then, in the upper right corner of the frame, a small white point of light appears. It moves, slowly, smoothly, in a gentle arc, not the way a bug moves, with that erratic, jerking energy that cameras capture all the time, but smoothly, like something with intention, like something that knows where it's going. It crosses the frame at roughly chest height, higher than a ground-level insect, lower than a bird in flight. It passes in front of the porch railing. It moves toward the front door. And then, About 18 inches from the door, the motion sensor light clicks on. The orb vanishes. Not gradually, not fading out the way a reflection or lens artifact would, but instantly. One frame present, next frame gone. The porch now brightly lit and entirely empty. This is the detail that investigators focus on. A dust particle, lens flare, or insect would not vanish at the precise moment a motion sensor activates. A reflection from a passing car's headlights would not travel in that smooth arc, at that consistent height, across that span of the frame. And most tellingly, the motion sensor was triggered. Something crossed that sensor's detection field. Whatever appeared in the footage had physical presence sufficient to activate a piece of technology designed to detect it. The homeowner's neighbor, who had her own camera mounted at a slightly different angle, reviewed her footage from the same time window. The orb did not appear in her footage. The motion sensor activation did not appear in her footage. As far as her camera was concerned, nothing had happened on that porch at all. The homeowner's camera says otherwise. Make of that what you will. Faces you don't want to see. Incident 07. The figure behind the notification. This one begins with a sound that an increasing number of Americans know intimately. The buzz of a security notification in the middle of the night. The homeowner, a woman living alone in a suburb of Nashville, Tennessee, had installed her doorbell camera 3 weeks earlier after a neighbor's home had been burglarized. She hadn't had any alerts in those 3 weeks. Nothing more alarming than the mail carrier and a pizza delivery. And she'd begun to relax into the slightly false sense of security that comes from having surveillance without having had anything to surveil. Then, one night, her phone buzzed. Your doorbell has detected a visitor. She checked the app, looked at the live feed, saw nothing. Just the empty porch, the quiet street, the familiar geometry of her front yard in the pale infrared glow. She assumed it was what these things almost always are. A moth passing too close to the sensor, a leaf carried by wind, some small false positive that means nothing. She set the phone down and tried to go back to sleep. 2 minutes later, the phone buzzed again. She picked it up, opened the app, looked at the feed, and this time, something was there. The figure in the frame was standing perfectly still, centered in the camera's field of view, at the far edge of the front walkway, just far enough back to be fully visible and just close enough to be undeniably intentional. It appeared to be a person, but the word person feels inadequate as a descriptor because there was something about this figure's posture, its stillness, its positioning, so precise, so deliberate, that registered as wrong in a way that pure description struggles to capture. The most disturbing element, the one that the homeowner later cited when she told this story to friends and family and eventually to the internet at large, was the eyes. Even at the distance the figure was standing, perhaps 20 feet from the camera. And even in the compressed, slightly degraded quality of the night vision feed, the eyes were visible. And they were wrong, not in an obvious, theatrical way. Not in the way of a movie monster or a ghost story illustration. Wrong in a subtler, more fundamental way, a way that the human brain, which has spent 100,000 years becoming expert at reading the human face, registers before conscious thought can articulate the reason. The spacing was off. The whites were too visible. They were pointed directly at the camera with a fixedness that felt less like a gaze and more like a lock. Like whatever this was had found the camera and was not going to look away. The homeowner called 911 while watching the feed. She described what she was seeing. The dispatcher stayed on the line with her. The figure did not move while she was on the phone. Not for the 3 minutes it took the first patrol car to reach her street. When the officer's headlights swept across the front yard, The figure was gone. There was no one on the street, no one in the immediate vicinity. The officer walked the perimeter of the property with a flashlight and found nothing. There was nobody out there, the responding officer confirmed. The footage, which the homeowner shared online with her explicit consent, has been viewed millions of times. The debate about what the figure is, or was, has never conclusively resolved. The eyes are what everyone comes back to. Frame after frame, zoomed, enhanced, color adjusted. Those eyes. Incident 08, the tape. Here's a thing that most people don't think about when they install a security camera. The camera is only as useful as its field of view. And if someone knows where the camera is, if they've scoped the property, noted the angle, understood the coverage, then the camera becomes something else. Not a deterrent, a target. This footage was captured in a residential neighborhood in suburban Ohio. The homeowner had recently had his camera installed as part of a wider home security upgrade. New locks, reinforced door frame, the whole package. And he'd mentioned it to a few neighbors, which means it was not exactly a secret. The motion alert came through on a weekend afternoon, not late at night, not the small hours of the morning. A perfectly ordinary Saturday afternoon. When the homeowner opened the app, he saw a figure on his porch. The figure was wearing dark clothing and had their hood pulled up, the face turned away from the camera. In one hand, just barely visible in the frame, was a small roll of something. Tape. Black electrical tape. The figure reached up, unhurried and deliberate, and pressed a strip of tape over the camera lens. The feed went dark. What happened in the period that followed, how long the tape was in place, what transpired on the porch or at the door while the camera was blinded, the homeowner doesn't know. What he knows is what the camera eventually recorded when the tape's edge caught a breeze and peeled back. The figure in the dark clothing and hoodie was still there, standing at the door, facing it, not moving. The homeowner, who had by this point armed himself and positioned himself in the hallway, spoke through the camera's audio system. His voice, he later said, was steadier than he expected. "Step away from the door," he said. "I have a firearm and the police are already on their way." The figure turned, looked at the camera, at the partially uncovered lens, the sliver of restored visibility, stood for a moment that the homeowner described as the longest 4 seconds of my life. Then they walked away. Police found no one in the area when they arrived. The tape was still partially adhered to the camera lens. It was processed for prints but came back clean. Gloves, probably, though that detail was never confirmed to the homeowner officially. What the homeowner says now when he tells this story: "The tape is what gets me. Anyone can walk up to your door. Anyone can knock. But someone who brings tape, someone who has thought about the camera, planned for the camera, prepared for the camera, that's a different kind of person. That's someone who's been thinking about your house for a long time, before you ever knew they existed." He has since added 2 additional cameras covering angles that were previously blind spots. The tape is in an evidence bag somewhere. Incident 09, the gun at the door. There are moments in security footage that, when you understand what you're actually watching, make the air feel different. This is one of them. The footage was captured at a home in metropolitan Atlanta. The timestamp puts it at mid-afternoon, school pickup time in most neighborhoods, the time of day when houses are often empty and streets are quiet in that particular way that certain people learn to recognize and exploit. The camera first picks up a vehicle, a dark SUV, moving slowly along the street before pulling to the curb. 2 men get out. The first man, we'll call him the lead, immediately starts moving toward the house with purpose. He's already adjusting his clothing as he walks, the movement that the camera catches but that the conscious mind sometimes takes a moment to process. He's not adjusting his collar. He's adjusting a firearm. By the time he reaches the porch, the weapon is in his hand and held down at his side, partially obscured from the street by his body, concealed from casual passing view, but present, immediate, and ready. He rings the doorbell with his free hand. The other man stays near the vehicle, back toward the camera, watching the street with the practiced casualness of someone performing a lookout function. He checks his phone, looks up and down the block, checks his phone again. Nobody answers the door. The lead man waits. He checks the time. He looks at the door, then looks back at the man by the vehicle, who shakes his head slightly. He looks at the door again. Nobody answers. After a period, the timestamp puts it just under 2 minutes. 2 minutes during which a man is standing on a family's front porch, holding a firearm. He walks back to the vehicle. They drive away. The homeowner was not home. His wife and 2 children were at soccer practice, as they were every Thursday afternoon at that time. He watched this footage that evening after he came home from work and after the kids were in bed, sitting alone in the kitchen with his phone in his hand, watching a man hold a gun outside the door his children walk through every day. He moved his family out of that neighborhood within 4 months. When the camera is all that stands between you. Incident 10. The return. There is a psychological principle called sunk cost, and while it usually applies to financial decisions, it turns out it also applies in a particularly dangerous way to burglars. This is a story about 2 men who, despite every reasonable signal that they should cut their losses and leave, simply couldn't bring themselves to do so. The homeowners, a couple in their late 30s living in a suburb of Charlotte, North Carolina, had installed their doorbell camera 2 years prior. They'd bought it, set it up, tested it, and then largely stopped thinking about it, the way people stop thinking about smoke detectors and seatbelts. Present, functional, unremarked upon until suddenly essential. The first alert came on a Tuesday evening. Both homeowners were home, though neither was near the front of the house. The camera captured 2 men approaching the driveway, walking together from the street with that particular lack of hesitation that suggests they'd either scoped the property before or had decided not to waste time on the pretense of casual walking. The man on the left spotted the camera. The moment he did, his body language changed entirely. A flinch, then a redirect, then a rapid verbal exchange with his companion, after which both men turned and walked back to the street quickly enough that it read as almost comically obvious. That should have been the end of it. It was not. 11 minutes later, the timestamp is specific, the same 2 men came back. The homeowner had been watching the footage on her phone. When she saw the same 2 faces reappear on her camera, she felt, she later said, something she can only describe as the floor dropping. Not quite fear, not yet, but the precursor to fear. The body's recognition of a threat before the mind has finished processing it. She spoke through the camera. Clear, direct, no hesitation. "I can see you," she said. "I see both of you. I've already called the police. They are on their way right now." One of the men, the one who'd spotted the camera the first time, immediately backed away from the door. His companion, however, had apparently committed to a different plan. He stepped forward and in one brutal, decisive motion kicked the door. The door held. He kicked it again. It held again. "They're literally 30 seconds away," the homeowner said through the speaker. Her voice in the recording is extraordinarily steady. 30 seconds. The second kick had made a sound. a crack and a thud that carried through the neighborhood's afternoon quiet. And the man who'd kicked it seemed to register for the first time that this was not going the way it was supposed to. He looked at his companion. His companion was already moving toward the street. They ran. The police arrived 4 minutes later. Not 30 seconds, she admitted afterward. But she'd needed them to believe it and canvassed the neighborhood. They were not found that day. The door had held because of the reinforced strike plate the homeowner's husband had installed during a home improvement weekend 3 years prior, a project she had at the time gently teased him about as excessive. She has not teased him about it since. Incident 11. The Florida Man with a Rifle. There are stories on this list that are frightening because of their ambiguity, the unknown figure, and the unexplained presence, the thing you can't quite make sense of. And then there are stories that are frightening for the opposite reason, because there is no ambiguity, because everything is perfectly horribly clear. September 10th, 2018. A neighborhood in Central Florida in the kind of subdivision where the houses are close together and the streets have names like Magnolia Way and Heron Court, and the children ride bikes after dinner until the streetlights come on. It is 4 o'clock in the morning. A woman, we'll call her Carol, is asleep. Her husband is out of town for work. Her 2 children, ages 7 and 9, are asleep in their rooms. The house is quiet. The neighborhood is quiet. At 4 o'clock in the morning in a Central Florida subdivision, this is exactly how things are supposed to be. Her doorbell camera triggers. Carol is a light sleeper. The notification sound brings her awake in seconds. She reaches for her phone, opens the app. Standing on her porch, lit by the camera's sensor light, is her neighbor. She knows him, or knows of him, the way you know of a neighbor, by sight, by name, by the occasional wave across the yard. His daughter had stayed at Carol's house recently, had shown up on a Tuesday night unexpectedly, visibly distressed, with a bag that suggested she wasn't planning on going home soon. She'd told Carol, quietly, that she was afraid to be at home. She hadn't elaborated. Carol had given her dinner, had given her the guest room, and had tried the next day to figure out what to do. Now the daughter's father was standing on her porch at 4 o'clock in the morning, wearing a bulletproof vest, carrying an assault rifle. Carol did not freeze. She did not hesitate. She took both her children from their beds, moved them to the bathroom, the most interior room, the most walls between them and the front of the house, and locked the door. She called 911. She called her husband. She sat on the bathroom floor with her children who were awake now and frightened, and she kept her voice even and her hand steady, and she waited. The man on her porch did not attempt to enter the house. He stood. He waited. The camera recorded him standing there, the rifle visible, the vest visible, for the duration, 23 minutes from the initial alert to the arrival of the police. He was taken into custody without incident. He was charged with aggravated assault. The full story of what preceded that night, what had been happening in that house, why the daughter had been afraid, what the man had intended, is not something we will speculate about here. What we will say is this: Carol's doorbell camera gave her 23 minutes of warning. 23 minutes to get her children to safety, to make her calls, to put walls between her family and whatever was about to happen. Without it, she would have known nothing until she heard the knock at the door. 23 minutes is everything. Incident 12. The figure across the street. We want to end where we began, with the inexplicable, not with the dramatic, not with the provably criminal or the clearly dangerous, with the thing that resists explanation, the thing that sits at the edge of understanding, and stays there, immovable, indifferent to analysis. This footage was captured by a homeowner in a small town in western Pennsylvania. The camera was mounted on the front of the house, facing the street. Standard installation, standard angle, nothing unusual about the setup. What's unusual is what the camera saw at 2:40 in the morning on a November night. Across the street, perhaps 40 feet from the camera, a figure was moving. Moving is the right word. Walking implies too much familiarity. The figure's movement was smooth in a way that, when you watch the footage, makes you very quietly aware that something about it is not right. Not wrong in an obvious way. Wrong in the way of a machine mimicking movement. Wrong in the way of a reflection seen in water. Recognizable but subtly, uncorrectably off. The figure appeared to be translucent. Not invisible, not a trick of the eye or a shadow, but translucent, in the way that very thin fabric is translucent. Present, unmistakable, but not quite solid. It moved along the sidewalk across the street. It did not look toward the camera. It did not look toward the house. It moved with the focused forward progress of something that had somewhere to be and knew how to get there. And then it was gone, past the edge of the frame, into the dark. The homeowner, like the man in Tennessee earlier in our list, did what seemed like the obvious thing. He contacted his neighbor across the street, who also had a camera mounted on the front of her house, and asked if she could check her footage from the same time window. She did. Her camera showed nothing. The sidewalk in front of her house at 2:40 in the morning on that November night was completely empty. No figure, no movement, no translucent shape making its unhurried way down the block. Nothing. His camera had captured something crossing directly in front of her field of view. Her camera, aimed at the same sidewalk from a different angle, captured nothing at all. There is no consensus explanation for this. There is no rational resolution that accounts for both cameras simultaneously capturing different realities of the same sidewalk at the same moment. There is only the footage, his footage showing the figure, her footage showing the empty dark, and the question that this leaves behind: what exactly walks down our streets at 2:40 in the morning? What moves through the world at the edge of detection, in those hours when most of us are asleep and the cameras are the only thing still watching? We don't know. But here's what we do know. The cameras are watching. All of them. Every night. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, they see things we were never meant to see. Stay safe out there. Lock your doors. Check your cameras. And whatever you do, don't open the door.